It's funny how hindsight works, how little moments that seemed insignificant at the time suddenly form a clear pattern when you look back. For me, that pattern started about a year ago, around the time things started to change between me and my wife, Sarah. We'd been married for 10 years, and, like most couples, had our ups and downs. But this was different. It began with her late nights. At first, it was an extra hour or two at work here and there. Sarah was always dedicated to her job, so it didn't raise any red flags. I remember jokingly calling her a workaholic when she came home past midnight, only to get a half-hearted laugh in return. Her smile wasn't the same. And neither was mine. Then, there was her phone. Sarah had never been secretive about her phone before, but all of a sudden, it was like she was glued to it. She'd take it everywhere, even to the bathroom. Every time I walked into a room, she'd casually flip it over on the table or shove it into her pocket. I tried not to make a big deal of it, convincing myself I was being paranoid. But deep down, a knot was forming in my stomach. I ignored it, hoping I was wrong. We stopped talking as much. I'm not saying we had deep, soul-searching conversations every day before, but now there was just silence. Dinner became quiet. Our evenings were filled with empty small talk or Sarah scrolling through her phone while I stared blankly at the TV. It felt like we were becoming strangers, but I kept pushing that feeling down. 10 years of marriage couldn't crumble over something as trivial as busy schedules and a little distance, right? I wish I had asked more questions. I wish I had listened to the voice in my head. But I didn't. Instead, I let things slide, telling myself everything would go back to normal eventually. That's what long-term marriages were about, riding out the rough patches, right? The real blow came on a Saturday morning. Sarah was in the shower, and her phone was left on the nightstand. I hadn't planned on checking it, I swear I didn't. But it vibrated, and curiosity got the best of me. My hands were shaking as I picked it up and saw the message preview from someone named Mike. Asterisk, last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. Asterisk. My heart dropped. I stood there, frozen, rereading the message as the reality of what I had just seen hit me like a ton of bricks. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to come up with some innocent explanation, but there was none. Everything made sense now. The late nights, the secrecy, the emotional distance. I felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner. My wife, my partner for a decade, was having an affair. The knot in my stomach tightened as anger, hurt, and disbelief washed over me all at once. I wanted to confront her right then, but I couldn't. I needed proof. Something more than a single message, because knowing Sarah, she would try to deny it or explain it away. So, I did what I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. There were more messages. Dozens of them. Flirty texts, photos, even plans to meet up when she claimed to be working late. My hands trembled as I scrolled through weeks, maybe months, of messages. There was no denying it anymore. Sarah was cheating on me. I put her phone back just as I heard the shower stop. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm, to pretend like nothing had happened. I couldn't confront her yet. Not without figuring out what to do next. I had to play it smart. As she walked out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, she smiled at me like nothing was wrong. It was the same smile I had seen 1,000 times before, but now, it felt fake, like a mask hiding her betrayal. "Morning, babe," she said casually, walking over to give me a quick kiss on the cheek. I forced a smile in return, my mind reeling from what I had just discovered. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. This was someone else. And for the first time in 10 years of marriage, I felt completely alone. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't ready to face it just yet. Not today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. But one thing was certain, my life was about to change forever. Chapter 2, The Weight of Secrets. The hours after discovering Sarah's affair were a blur. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but my mind was elsewhere, lost in the whirlwind of emotions that had taken over. I couldn't believe it. How did we get here? How could she betray me after 10 years? Sarah went about her day like nothing was wrong. She made breakfast, asked if I needed anything, and even mentioned how she had to run errands later. I responded in one-word answers, doing everything in my power to keep my anger and devastation hidden. But inside, I was falling apart. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand why she did this to us. But another part of me wasn't ready to hear the answer. What if she didn't regret it? What if she was already planning her life with this other guy? The thought of it made me sick to my stomach. By the time she left the house, I was exhausted, emotionally drained from holding it all in. I watched her drive away, wondering if she was meeting him. Mike. His name echoed in my mind like a cruel joke, taunting me with images I didn't want to see. But I had to know. I couldn't just sit here in the dark, tortured by my imagination. I grabbed my phone and did something I never thought I'd do. I tracked her. A year ago, I had installed a GPS app on both of our phones for safety purposes, in case either of us got into an accident or went missing. It was supposed to be a protective measure, but now, it felt like I was crossing a line. Yet, what choice did I have? Sarah had already crossed the ultimate line. This wasn't about trust anymore, it was about the truth. I watched the little blinking dot that represented her car as it moved through the city. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. She went to the grocery store, like she said she would. Then, she stopped at the pharmacy. But after that, the dot didn't head back home. Instead, it drove to an unfamiliar part of town, a neighborhood I didn't recognize. My heart raced as I watched her stop at what looked like a residential area. Was this where he lived? I felt like I was going to be sick. My worst fears were being confirmed, one agonizing second at a time. I knew I had a decision to make. I could confront her the moment she got home, rip off the bandage and demand answers. Or I could wait, keep playing along, gathering more proof, until I was sure I had everything I needed. But the thought of another day pretending, of sleeping next to her knowing what she was doing behind my back, was unbearable. Hours passed, and when Sarah finally came home, I was numb. I had spent the entire day overthinking, playing out every possible scenario in my head. When she walked in, bags of groceries in hand, she smiled at me again, that same mask she'd worn for weeks. I hated it. "Hey, honey. Sorry I was out so long, traffic was crazy," she said casually as she set the bags down on the kitchen counter. Her voice was so normal, so routine, like she wasn't living a double life. I stood up, unable to fake it any longer. "I know," I blurted out before I could stop myself. Sarah froze, her back to me. She didn't turn around right away, but I saw her body stiffen, as if bracing for impact. After a few seconds of tense silence, she slowly turned to face me, confusion and something else, fear flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice a little too calm. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. There was no going back now. "I know about Mike. I know you've been cheating on me." For a moment, the world stopped. Sarah's face drained of color, her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I watched her, waiting for the denial, the lies, the excuses. But all she did was stare at me in shock. Then, after what felt like an eternity, her expression shifted just for a second. I saw it. Guilt. She looked down at the floor, and in that moment, I knew I was right. "Jake." she started, her voice trembling, but she couldn't finish. I felt a surge of anger, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. How long? I demanded, my voice harsher than I intended. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. It's not what you think. Don't lie to me. I snapped, cutting her off. I saw the messages, Sarah. I know what's going on. She wiped at her eyes, the tears coming faster now. I didn't mean for it to happen. I don't know how it got this far. I shook my head, unable to comprehend what she was saying. You didn't mean for it to happen? You've been sneaking around behind my back for months, and that's all you can say. Sarah broke down then, covering her face with her hands as she sobbed. I watched her, feeling a mix of rage and heartache, wanting to comfort her but knowing I couldn't not after what she had done. I'm sorry, Jake, she whispered through her tears. I never wanted to hurt you. But she had. And no amount of apologies could change that. I stood there, watching the woman I had loved for a decade fall apart in front of me, and for the first time in my life, I had no idea what to do. All I knew was that our marriage, our life together, it was over. Chapter 3, The Shattered Mirror. After Sarah's confession, everything felt surreal, like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The woman I had shared my life with for the past 10 years stood in front of me, her tears flowing, but all I saw was a stranger. I didn't recognize her anymore, and the betrayal cut so deep that I didn't know how to process it. We sat in the living room after her sobs quieted down, both of us unsure of what to say. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. I could feel the weight of her guilt, but it didn't make things better. Nothing could. I need to understand, I said finally, my voice calmer than I felt inside. How did this happen? Why, Sarah? She wiped her face, avoiding my eyes. I could tell she didn't know where to start, and a part of me didn't want to hear it. But I needed to. I deserved to know how our life had unraveled like this. It wasn't like I went looking for it, she began, her voice shaking. Mike, he's a colleague. We work together. It just started off as friendly conversation, you know? I was stressed at work, and we were both venting about stuff, and I don't know, Jake. It just happened. One day we went out for drinks after a long meeting, and I crossed a line I shouldn't have. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. And that's it? One night and suddenly you're having an affair. She shook her head, sniffling. It wasn't just one night. After that, I told myself it was a mistake, that it wouldn't happen again. But then we started texting. And I don't know, things got out of control. I know that doesn't make it right. I know I've hurt you. I'm so sorry. I stared at her, my mind spinning. This wasn't just some one-time lapse in judgment. This was months of lying, of sneaking around behind my back. Do you love him? The question came out before I could stop it, and I immediately regretted it. But I needed to know. Sarah's eyes widened, her face pale. No. I mean, I don't think so. It's not love, Jake. It was just. I don't even know what it was. It was an escape, maybe. I wasn't thinking. I never wanted to leave you. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Well, you've done a great job of staying, haven't you? She flinched at the sarcasm in my voice, but I didn't care. I couldn't wrap my head around how someone could claim they loved me while tearing apart the life we built together. I need some space, I said abruptly, standing up. I can't be around you right now. Sarah's face crumpled, and she reached out toward me. Jake, please. Don't go. We can work through this. I know I messed up, but we can fix it. I don't want to lose you. But I was already walking toward the door, grabbing my keys off the table. "You should have thought about that before," I muttered, my voice barely audible. Without another word, I walked out, shutting the door behind me. The cool evening air hit my face as I got into the car, but it did nothing to soothe the burning anger and pain inside. I drove aimlessly for a while, not knowing where to go, just needing to get away from the house, from Sarah, from the broken reality I was now facing. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot at a nearby park. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring out at nothing in particular, my mind replaying everything over and over. The way Sarah had smiled at me while secretly texting someone else. The nights I waited for her to come home, never knowing she was with him. It all felt so unreal. The betrayal wasn't just about the physical aspect. It was the emotional connection she had with someone else. The fact that she had shared pieces of herself, pieces that were supposed to be mine, with another man. That was the part that tore me apart the most. I thought about our wedding day. The way she had looked at me, so full of love and promises. We had said vows, made commitments to each other, but somewhere along the line, they had been broken. And I hadn't even seen it coming. How do you go from building a life with someone, trusting them with everything, to suddenly realizing it was all built on lies? I didn't have the answers. And I wasn't sure I ever would. I stayed in that parking lot until the sun started to set, the sky turning shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, but I couldn't appreciate it. Not with the storm inside me. Finally, I made the decision to head home, not because I wanted to face Sarah, but because I had nowhere else to go. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a few moments, bracing myself for whatever came next. When I walked through the front door, the house was eerily quiet. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her face red and puffy from crying. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "I know I can't ask for forgiveness," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "But please, please don't give up on us." I didn't say anything for a long time. I couldn't. The weight of everything was crushing me, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength to carry it anymore. "I don't know if there is an us anymore, Sarah," I finally said, my voice cold. "I need time to figure this out." Her face crumbled again, but she nodded, understanding that I wasn't ready to make any decisions. I walked past her, heading upstairs to the guest room, where I shut the door behind me and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time in 10 years of marriage, I couldn't sleep in the same bed as my wife. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I ever would again. Chapter 4, Life in Limbo. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. Each morning I woke up in the guest room, the reality of my situation hitting me all over again. The bed felt cold and unfamiliar, but not nearly as cold as the distance that had formed between Sarah and me. I avoided her as much as possible, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to act. We were still under the same roof, but the house felt like a battlefield, and every word or gesture seemed fraught with tension. Sarah gave me space, as I had asked. She was quieter than I had ever known her to be, moving around the house like a ghost, barely speaking unless I addressed her first. I could see the guilt weighing on her, but for some reason, it didn't make me feel better. It only deepened the ache in my chest. I knew she was sorry, but it didn't change what she had done. I couldn't stop thinking about him, Mike. This man I didn't know, but who had somehow inserted himself into my life and destroyed everything. Who was he? What did he have that I didn't? How could Sarah throw away 10 years of marriage for someone like him? I considered looking him up, searching for him on social media, maybe even going to his workplace to confront him. But I stopped myself. What good would it do? It wasn't Mike who had made vows to me. It wasn't him who had promised me a future and then betrayed me. No, this was between Sarah and me. About a week after the confrontation, Sarah approached me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. I had tried to maintain some normalcy, still going to work, doing chores around the house, but every task felt mechanical, like I was just going through the motions. I could feel her standing there behind me, waiting, and I braced myself for whatever she was about to say. "Jake," she began softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I didn't turn around. I kept stirring my coffee, my back to her. "About what?" "About us. About what happens next." I sighed, setting the spoon down on the counter. This conversation was inevitable, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to have it. Still, I couldn't avoid it forever. Slowly, I turned to face her. Her eyes were red, and I could see the toll this had taken on her too. But I wasn't sure if I cared. Not anymore. "What do you want me to say, Sarah?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. She bit her lip, nervous. "I just want to know what you're thinking. If there's any chance at all that we can fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "How do you even begin to fix something like this?" She looked down, her hands twisting in front of her. "I don't know. I made a mistake, Jake. A huge mistake. But I don't want to lose you. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you, can you give me another chance?" I stared at her, feeling a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to take her in my arms and pretend like none of this had happened. But another part of me, the part that had been betrayed, lied to, and crushed, couldn't fathom how we could ever go back to what we were. "Why should I give you another chance?" I asked, my voice hard. "How do I know you won't do it again?" She winced, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know I've broken your trust, and it'll take time, maybe a lot of time, to rebuild that. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'll go to counseling. We can go together, if you want. I'll cut off all contact with Mike. I swear, Jake, I'm done with him. I want to save our marriage. I know I don't deserve it, but I love you. I never stopped loving you." That word love hung in the air between us like a fragile thread. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love could fix this, that somehow we could find our way back to each other. But every time I thought about the lies, the betrayal, it felt like love wasn't enough. "Not anymore. I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I said finally, my voice raw with the truth. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I understand. I know I've given you no reason to trust me. But I'm asking you to try. Please, Jake. Don't walk away from us." I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what the right answer was. Part of me wanted to end it, to pack my things and walk away from the wreckage. But the other part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, the love we once shared, wasn't ready to give up completely. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. My mind wouldn't stop spinning, replaying Sarah's words over and over. Could we really make this work? Was there anything left to salvage? Or was our marriage too far gone? In the quiet of the night, I thought about what I wanted. I wanted my life back. I wanted the woman I married, the one who had been my best friend, my partner, my everything. But that woman felt so distant now, like she had disappeared the moment she crossed that line with Mike. Maybe I was holding on to an illusion, a version of Sarah that no longer existed. Or maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us to rebuild. But it wouldn't be easy. It would be painful, and it would take time. The question was whether I had it in me to try. By the time the sun started to rise, I still didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in limbo forever. At some point, I would have to decide whether to fight for my marriage or let it go. And right now, I wasn't sure which choice would hurt more. Chapter 5, The First Step. The days stretched on, and the uncertainty that hung between Sarah and me only seemed to grow heavier. Every conversation we had was stilted, awkward, as if we were walking on eggshells around each other. I found myself avoiding her more, staying late at work, or spending extra time at the gym. Anything to avoid facing the decision I wasn't ready to make. But I knew I couldn't run forever. This wasn't a problem that would resolve itself. One evening, after another long day at the office, I found myself sitting in the car outside our house, unable to go inside. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the front door, my mind a jumble of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. I couldn't keep living like this. I had to make a decision. And no matter what I chose, I knew it would change everything. That night, as I sat in the guest room, I heard a soft knock on the door. I hesitated, but eventually said, "Come in." Sarah opened the door slowly, peeking in before stepping inside. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well either. Her eyes were red and swollen, and I wondered how many nights she had spent crying over this mess we were in. "Can I sit?" she asked quietly, gesturing to the chair by the window. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, she broke the silence. "I've been thinking about everything," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've destroyed the trust between us, and I don't expect things to just go back to the way they were. But I don't want to give up on us, Jake. I love you. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, if you'll let me." I looked at her, studying her face, searching for any sign of the woman I had married. She looked different now, worn down by the guilt and the weight of her actions. But there was something else there too: determination. A spark that told me she wasn't ready to let go. But was I? "I don't know, Sarah," I admitted, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we had." She nodded, biting her lip. "I know. And maybe we can't. But maybe we don't need to go back. Maybe we can build something new. Something stronger. I don't know, Jake, but I'm willing to try. I just need to know if you are too." Her words hung in the air, and I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that we could rebuild. But the fear of being hurt again, of being betrayed again, held me back. "What if it happens again?" I asked, my voice raw. "What if you hurt me again?" She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I won't. I swear to you, Jake, I won't. I know I've broken your trust, and it'll take time to earn it back. But I will. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything. Just, please, give me a chance to make this right." Her desperation was palpable, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a crack in the wall I had built around myself. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, the regret that weighed on her. She was willing to fight for us, but the question remained, was I? The next morning, I woke up feeling more conflicted than ever. But I knew I had to make a decision. This limbo we were living in was tearing us both apart, and it wasn't sustainable. That afternoon, I texted Sarah and asked her to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. Neutral ground. I didn't want to have this conversation at home, where the weight of everything felt heavier. I needed a clear head to figure out what came next. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a small table by the window. She looked nervous, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea, her eyes scanning the street as if she was afraid I wouldn't show up. When she saw me, she smiled hesitantly, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I sat down across from her, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. It was strange, sitting here in this public place, pretending to be two normal people when our world had been torn apart. But this was where we were now. And it was time to face it. "I've been thinking a lot," I began, unsure of how to start. "About us. About everything." Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving mine. She was waiting, holding her breath for what I was about to say. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you," I said, my voice steady. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you the same way again. But I'm willing to try. I don't want to make any promises, and I don't know where this will lead, but I don't want to just throw away 10 years without trying." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached across the table, her hand trembling as she placed it over mine. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Jake. I'll do everything I can to make this right." I nodded, unsure of what else to say. There were no guarantees, no easy answers. But in that moment, I realized something important: love wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about choosing to stay, choosing to fight, even when things got hard. Maybe we would make it through this. Maybe we wouldn't. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like we had a chance. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 6, Rebuilding from Ruins. In the days following our talk at the coffee shop, things between Sarah and me began to shift. It was subtle at first, small conversations that didn't feel forced, moments of shared silence that weren't quite so heavy. But the wounds were still there, raw and fresh, and every now and then, they would reopen with a word, a glance, or even a memory. We decided to take it slow. There were no promises, no illusions that things would magically go back to the way they were. We both knew better than that. This wasn't about fixing something broken, it was about building something entirely new from the shattered pieces of our marriage. But even as we began to tentatively move forward, I couldn't shake the anger that lingered just beneath the surface. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Sarah suggested counseling. "I think we need help," she said quietly, looking at me from across the room. "We can't do this on our own, Jake. I want us to have the best chance." I had expected her to suggest it at some point, but hearing it out loud still made me bristle. The idea of talking to a stranger about our private lives, about her affair, felt uncomfortable, almost invasive. But deep down, I knew she was right. We couldn't navigate this on our own. Not if we wanted to have any hope of healing. "Yeah," I said finally, nodding. "I think you're right. Let's do it." Sarah seemed relieved by my answer, and within a few days, she had found a marriage counselor and scheduled our first session. It felt like a step in the right direction, but I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. What if therapy only confirmed what I feared, that our marriage was beyond saving? The day of our first session arrived, and I found myself feeling anxious as we drove to the counselor's office. Sarah sat beside me, her hands clenched in her lap, her expression tense. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. We were both on edge, not knowing what to expect. When we arrived, the counselor, a middle-aged woman named Karen, greeted us with a warm smile and invited us into her office. The room was cozy, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. It was calming, but I still felt like a ball of nerves as we sat down. "Why don't we start by talking about why you're here?" Karen began, her voice gentle and non-judgmental. Sarah glanced at me, her eyes pleading, and I nodded for her to go ahead. I had an affair," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I betrayed Jake, and I want to do everything I can to fix our marriage." Karen nodded thoughtfully, her gaze shifting to me. "And how are you feeling, Jake?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "Angry. Hurt. Confused," I said, my voice tight. I don't know if I can trust her again. I don't know if we can come back from this. It was the first time I had said those words out loud, and hearing them made everything feel even more real. The pain was still there, as sharp as ever, but there was something cathartic about voicing it in that room. Karen listened carefully, nodding as we spoke. Trust is one of the hardest things to rebuild after betrayal, she said gently. But it's not impossible. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to be vulnerable with each other. Both of you have to be committed to the process. Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I am, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes. I wasn't sure if I was ready to say the same. But I was here. I was trying. That had to count for something. Over the next few weeks, we continued going to counseling, and slowly, the walls between us began to come down. It wasn't easy. Some sessions were incredibly painful, forcing us to confront the ugly truth of what had happened, to relieve the betrayal and its aftermath. But through it all, Karen guided us, helping us communicate in ways we hadn't been able to before. I learned things about Sarah that I hadn't known about: the pressures she had felt at work, the ways she had begun to feel disconnected from me long before the affair. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it gave me some insight into how we had ended up here. For her part, Sarah learned about the depth of my hurt, my feelings of inadequacy, and how her actions had shattered my sense of security in our relationship. She listened, really listened, in a way she hadn't before. And I could see that she was trying. She was showing up, being honest, and taking responsibility for the damage she had caused. There were moments when I felt hopeful, when I thought maybe, just maybe, we could make it through this. But there were also moments when the anger flared up again, and I questioned whether I could ever truly forgive her. Trust was a fragile thing, and even the smallest reminder of her betrayal could send me spiraling back into doubt. One night, after a particularly difficult session, we sat in the car in the counselor's parking lot, neither of us speaking. The weight of the conversation still hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. We had been talking about forgiveness, about what it would take for me to let go of the anger and resentment. I don't know if I can do it, I had admitted during the session. I want to, but every time I think I'm making progress, something pulls me back. Karen had been understanding. Forgiveness isn't linear, she had said. It's not something that happens all at once. It's a process, and it's okay if you're not there yet. But as we sat in the car, I could feel Sarah's frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She had been patient, but I knew it was hard for her to hear that I still hadn't forgiven her. Finally, she broke the silence. Jake, I know I've hurt you, she said quietly. And I know it's going to take time for you to trust me again. But, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I stared out the window, my mind racing. I didn't have an easy answer for her. Part of me wanted to say yes, to give her the reassurance she was looking for. But the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know if forgiveness was something I could offer, not yet. I want to, I said finally, my voice soft. But I can't promise you when or if it'll happen. All I can do is keep trying. She nodded, her face a mixture of hope and resignation. That's all I'm asking for. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah and I continued to work on our marriage. It was still a day-to-day battle. Some days we felt closer than we had in years, while other days it felt like we were back at square one. But slowly, we were finding our way back to each other. We started spending more time together, rediscovering the things that had brought us together in the first place. We went on walks, had long talks over dinner, and even started doing little things around the house together. It was like we were dating again, in a strange, bittersweet way. But the shadow of her affair still loomed over us, and I knew it would be a long time before it fully lifted, if it ever did. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and forgiveness wasn't something that could be forced. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance. And for now, that was enough. One step at a time. Chapter 7, Confronting the Past. The summer months brought a tentative warmth back into our lives, but the shadows of betrayal still lingered. Each day felt like a balancing act between healing and haunting memories, between the flicker of hope and the lingering doubts. We were still attending counseling sessions, and each one was like peeling back another layer of the onion that was our marriage, painful but necessary. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, I heard Sarah on the phone in the living room. I paused, instinctively trying to listen in. She was speaking softly, and I could hear snippets of her conversation. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the instinct was hard to resist. "I can't. I just don't want to lose him," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I messed up. I know that trust is broken, but I'm trying every day. I just need him to see that. Yes, I'm sure he'll come around." I felt my stomach twist at her words. Who was she talking to? Was it Mike? My mind raced as the old insecurities came flooding back. Had she really cut him out of her life completely? Or was this just a facade, another layer of deception? I couldn't handle the thought. I put the dish down and walked into the living room, trying to play it cool. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. Sarah looked startled, her eyes wide as she quickly ended the call. Just a friend," she said, her voice too high-pitched to be convincing. "A friend?" I echoed, crossing my arms. "What friend?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Just someone from work. They were asking how I was doing." I was just venting a little. Venting about what? My tone had turned sharper, and I felt the familiar anger bubbling up inside me. "About how hard it is to fix our marriage. About how you wish it hadn't happened." "No," she said, her voice rising defensively. "I was talking about work, Jake. I'm trying to get better at my job, and it's stressful." I could feel the tension crackling in the air between us. "You expect me to believe that? After everything that's happened, I can't help but feel like you're hiding something from me." Her expression shifted, going from defensiveness to hurt. "I'm not hiding anything from you. I promise. I'm trying, Jake. I'm trying so hard to be honest with you." But the doubt was already worming its way back in, gnawing at me. "Then why didn't you just tell me who it was?" I asked, frustration seeping into my voice. "Why did you feel the need to hide it?" "Because I didn't want to upset you," she shouted, tears springing to her eyes. "You've been through so much, and I don't want to make it worse. I thought I was doing the right thing." I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the room. "How can I trust you if you keep things from me? How can we move forward when every little thing feels like a trigger?" Sarah looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I'm not perfect, Jake. I'm trying to fix what I broke. I can't erase the past, but I'm trying to be better, to be someone you can trust again. Just give me that chance." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling of unease. Sarah had tried to assure me that everything was fine, but I couldn't help but feel like something was still lurking just beneath the surface. I couldn't shake the image of her on the phone, the way she had been so quick to end the call when I walked in. My mind raced, contemplating the worst-case scenarios. I felt the darkness creeping in, reminding me of my fears, my insecurities, and the betrayal that still stung. Just as I was about to drift off, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. I picked it up, half expecting it to be Sarah wanting to talk. Instead, it was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, Jake. It's Mike. We need to talk." My heart dropped as I stared at the screen, a mix of anger and dread coursing through me. How did he have my number? What could he possibly want to say to me? My first instinct was to ignore it, to put the phone down and try to forget about it. But then I thought about everything Sarah had been through, the lengths she had gone to rebuild our trust. Maybe this was something I needed to confront. I took a deep breath and replied, "What do you want?" The response came almost instantly. I know you're angry. I just want to clear the air. Can we meet? My fingers hovered over the screen, torn between rage and a strange sense of curiosity. I didn't want to meet him, didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much he had hurt me. But part of me knew that I had to confront this head-on if I ever wanted to truly move forward. Fine. Where and when? Dash. The next day, I found myself sitting at a small cafe downtown, waiting for Mike to arrive. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I didn't know what to expect from this meeting, and part of me regretted even agreeing to it. But I also knew that facing him might be the only way to exorcise the lingering shadows of his presence in my life. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he scanned the cafe. He had the same cocky demeanor that had fueled my anger before, but there was something else in his eyes: uncertainty. As our eyes met, I felt a rush of emotions: anger, betrayal, and something deeper, an unsettling sense of closure that I had been longing for. "Jake," he said, walking over to my table. He extended a hand, but I didn't take it. Instead, I gestured for him to sit. "Let's get this over with," I said, my voice low and steady. He nodded, taking a seat across from me. "I appreciate you meeting me. I know this is awkward, but I wanted to apologize." "Apologize?" I scoffed, crossing my arms. "You think that's enough? You've ruined my marriage. You think a simple apology is going to fix that?" Mike looked down at his hands, his expression earnest. "I know I can't take back what happened. I messed up, and I didn't consider the consequences. I never meant to hurt you or Sarah. I was stupid and selfish, and I regret everything." I felt a rush of anger. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to just walk in here and act like you didn't do anything wrong. You knew she was married, and yet you pursued her anyway." "I know, and I'm sorry. I was caught up in the moment. It was a terrible mistake, and I've been struggling with it ever since," he admitted, looking genuinely remorseful. "But I wanted you to know that I'm done with her. I've cut all ties. I didn't think it would go that far, but it did, and I've regretted it ever since." I searched his eyes for any sign of deception but found none. For a moment, I wondered if perhaps he was being honest. Maybe he had genuinely realized the weight of his actions. But that didn't change the fact that he had crossed a line, one that had irrevocably altered my life. "Why should I believe you?" I asked, my voice still heavy with skepticism. "You think I'm just supposed to take your word for it?" "I can't make you believe me," he said, his tone calm. "But I wanted to come here and tell you myself, rather than letting you hear it from someone else. I respect you, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive Sarah and move on." "Forgive her?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "You have no idea how hard that is for me." He nodded, a look of understanding crossing his face. "I can imagine. But you deserve to find peace too. You've been hurt, and it's not fair to let that pain consume you." His words struck a chord with me. Deep down, I knew he was right. I had to let go of the anger I was holding onto, not just for Sarah's sake, but for my own. I couldn't keep letting this consume me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my tone softer now. "What do you want from me? Honestly?" "I want nothing from you," he replied, his expression earnest. "I just wanted to clear the air and let you know that I'm out of the picture. I never wanted to cause you pain, and I hope you can find a way to heal." As the weight of his words settled between us, I realized that this meeting wasn't just about confronting Mike, it was about confronting my own fears and doubts. I couldn't keep letting him hold power over me. I had to reclaim my life, my marriage, and my future. "Thank you for being honest," I said, my voice steady. "I'll think about what you said. But know this, if you ever try to come between us again, I won't."